Welcome to Meanwhile at the Museum, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes with the people, stories, and shenanigans that make Cincinnati Museum Center what it is. I'm Cody Hefner, and I'm joined, as always, by Magic Mitch, our producer.
Hey.
And today we have in the Beat Laboratory, Christine Engels, our archivist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So your title for years has always been pretty easy for me because I know Christine, she's our archivist. I don't know what an archivist does. It sounds really cool, though. Like, archivist sounds, because you think of the National Archives and all this stuff. So if you enjoy history and old documents and all that stuff, archivist sounds awesome.
It is.
Is it? Okay,
It is.
good. It lives up to it.
Seriously, I think I have like the coolest job. I think every curator feels that way, but there's always something new and interesting. You open a box, you really don't know what's in it until you open it, and it's either like, oh, wow, or, oh no. That needs a lot of work.
Pull back the curtain. What does an archivist do? And you mentioned, so you said every curator thinks they have the coolest job. Mm-hmm. Is an archivist a curator?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just so... Basically, I've fallen into my role because nobody else was there to do it many times. I think, like lots of us, our titles are archivists, but both Sarah and I do the work of a manuscript curator as well. So it's just not on our title because then it would have to be archivist / manuscript curator / records managers
/ reader of
these are just
bad handwriting.
Archivist. Yes, yeah, exactly.
So what would the distinction between an archivist and a manuscript curator be?
That's an interesting question. I'm guessing that because my job requires more of managing the collection, the actual physical collection, I imagine being a curator means you might have a little more time to do research. I don't really know. It's a good question. It's just one of those titles that just stays, and it does sound impressive, so people like hearing it.
It's just, it is funny because, someone at some point walks in and says, you know what, I think this is a better reflection of the work I do. I think this is a better title for what I do. And they go, oh, okay. And then when that person leaves, they just refill that role. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes these titles and these names just kind of fall along. I remember our IT department used to have champions of IT. And you're like, what the hell is it? So when you're applying for your next job or you're writing your resume, I want to go up. So I will only take a champion position with an organization. It's hard
to go from champion to something that's not a champion anymore.
I'm applying for the champion position. I will accept a role as runner-up if there are growth opportunities. But so what do you do? What does an archivist do in a museum?
Well, there's lots of different things I do. So I take care of manage the collection we already have, which we have been building up since 1831. And so people have been collecting things that really took off in collecting after the Civil War. And
these are papers. Documents.
Yes. So what I manage is the handwritten things. So letters, unpublished letters, even if they're typed, hand-drawn maps, architectural drawings, business records, family records, all that kind of stuff.
How large is that collection?
It's huge. It's massive. It's over in several buildings. It's hard to put... I mean, you've seen the room you've seen the bigger room, and that's like maybe half of it. It's an immense collection, thousands of collections in the collection.
Because when you talk about a collection, you may be talking about one individual's papers,
right?
Which could be 5 sheets, or it could be, 100. So it kind of depends on how you count it, right?
Right, and it also brings up a good point for like the difference between libraries and archives is that we in archives arrange things by the donor, not by the subject. Ideally, sometimes in the past they did things that I'm like, scratch my head. But we keep things by the donor because that you feel that gives you a little bit more insight of why did this person collect these things. In a library, it's going to be cataloged by the author and subjects put together and stuff like that. But in an archive, it's more about where did these records come from? What's the history? And what the records themselves say is interesting, but how the records got to us is interesting too. How they survived hundreds of years or whatever.
See, that's fascinating. I never would have thought of that. So that's what's always amazing when you really step back and you think about museum collections. The story behind the thing is often as fascinating or more as the thing itself. So the story about the paper is as interesting as what's written on it, right?
Often, yeah. Sometimes no. Sometimes it was just ignored in a basement, which, benign neglect's a good thing sometimes. But but sometimes it does get passed down in families or passed down in a business or an organization. And you're like, how did this survive? And there's a reason that something interesting comes up.
If time allows, I have 100 questions to ask you about manuscript collections, but what does your day-to-day look like? And I know that's different every day, but if you could kind of squish it all together.
Well, so along with maintaining the collection we have, I also get lots of inquiries from researchers from all over the world. So I'm answering emails from researchers. If people can't come in person, we do research for them and try to help them. If it's extensive, we hook them up with a UC student or NKU student to help them do research. So a lot of it is helping people do their research. And then on top of that is growing the collection. And that is going out and talking with potential donors, which include individuals, it includes organizations, some that we already have a relationship with. So we already have some of the records, but we want to keep the relationship going. It's good to keep those contacts going. But then also looking at the collection and thinking, where are the spots that we're really missing something? And how can we fix that? This is when Claire and Gwen are my community outreach people. If I need to connect with any community, any group, they pretty much know somebody or know somebody who knows someone. So we are actively collecting about this area's history. So it's easier to collect when things are happening than 50 years later when things might have gotten thrown away. So we're always on the lookout for, picking up ephemera from events and different things from now. And along with that is also a big part of my job is maintaining the CMC's institutional records, which is also a massive collection.
Which is probably fun when, Elizabeth gives remarks at something and I put them in a manila envelope and I say, Christine, do you want these for the collection? Because there was one moment, I think it was when we reopened Union Terminal after the restoration or something, and Elizabeth was like, oh, we should see if Christine wants this for the collections, which then in my mind made a fuzzy distinction. Like, does she want all of them or just like some of them? And to me, on that specific example, I do think it's interesting because, again, these are always typed remarks. And so you don't get this great, you think that someone wrote this wonderful speech on the back of an envelope or something, which I have done. I have sat in a corner and, Elizabeth says, hey, do you have my remarks? I'm like, what? And so I sit in a corner with a scrap of paper and I write something real fast. But it is neat. We had a Princess Diana exhibit a handful of years ago. And one of the things I found was really interesting was her brother's remarks from her funeral. There were two versions, and you could see what had changed between the two and what had marked out. And then Diana herself had some speeches in there, and she had notes slow, fast, and underlined. So that stuff's kind of interesting because it puts their voice in your head, or you get a sense of how they were approaching it. But when you get collections, is it just having the thing itself is more important than the conditions it's in? Because some people may say, oh, I have this pamphlet from this rally or from this event, but it has a coffee stain on it or something like that. Does that add something to it, or are you kind of like, you know what, if this is all we have, at least we have it?
Exactly, yeah. If that's the only copy we have, no. If it's something we already have 10 immaculate copies, we're not going to accept that. But yeah, there's a lot of things that aren't in great condition but are still have interesting information that can be used to learn about the past.
So when a donor says, oh, I have these papers, are they, I mean, it probably comes in all all forms, a manila envelope in a box, or some, a banker's box, something like that, or like framed. Like, do they have letters that were signed by
All
President
sorts
Roosevelt
of
or
stuff.
something?
All
They say,
sorts
do you
of
want
stuff.
this?
Even worse if they just unannounced back up with a truck. um, we prefer, on all things, we prefer seeing the collection ourselves first to get an idea. But it does come in all sorts of different items. Some people really are hands-on, and before they give us a collection, they've gone through it, they've documented it, they've got an inventory. Other people, they're like, ugh, get it out of my house, get it gone. So it comes in all sorts of different levels of usefulness, of how quickly we can get it into the reading room for researchers to use.
What helps determine if we take something or if we don't? How do you determine if it has value to the collection?
Well, first, after I get contacted, I look through our collection, see what else do we have on either this topic, this person, organization, whatever. And then I look at what else in other history collections we might have related to it. And if it's something that it's lacking in what we have, our record, then we accept it. Examples, we just recently took in the records from the Mount Auburn Baptist Church. And that was benign neglect. They were in the basement. I always wondered where their records were. Well, they're in their basement still. And so we picked those up, but we didn't have anything on that church. So now we have more than enough on that church. So that's what we look at. Is it going to fill and answer some sort of questions about the collection and help complement the collection? Because in this case, in the church's case, we have things on the founders in the collection otherwise. So you're like, okay, we have the founders' papers here, we have this person's here, and they were related to, the hospital that built all around the church there.
What kind of gaps exist in the collections? I mean, you're talking about written documents in periods of history where certain groups weren't literate or were not taught to write. They didn't have that opportunity, or women lacking in that collection, are people of color lacking, in why?
Yes. The collection skews very much to wealthy white people because they were the ones collecting it. So
they felt they were self-important. So,
yes,
well, we're going to say
yes, and some of the work that me and Sarah are doing right now is going back and fixing old inventories, because there'll be a collection, I just say, call it the John Smith papers. But when you go through it, really it's the Elizabeth Smith papers. And just because he was a big lawyer, so it was called his papers, but really it's Elizabeth writing to everybody else in the family. So it's going back and changing it. Some of the work is going back and like fixing that and pulling those stories out of the collection. But definitely there's big gaps. We definitely have gaps, and our Black history is not where it should be. But I think we have great collections we keep building on. And definitely I think another area we lack on is more recent history. We get people, I had somebody ask me about if we had archives from something that happened in 2002. And I was like, way too recent for me. Way too recent. No, people haven't given us that yet. So, yeah.
So on that note, what does archives look like in the digital era? Like, we have letters from the 1800s, but how are people going to see text exchanges from the 2010s?
I don't know. That's a big. I just came back from an archives conference in Chicago, and that's nobody has a good answer. The best answer we can do is save your emails and your texts and things into a PDF format, which no one's going to do. So I don't know. There's not a good answer for that just yet, especially texts. Mainly we focused on trying to save emails, but really how we all communicate is text. There's not a good answer for that one.
I keep thinking I got to start handwriting a journal, so someday, if anyone cares, it'll be there.
You can title it If Anyone Cares.
We can save a PDF of the marketing team's chat. But it's a really good question, because what's always fascinating to me is sometimes people write these records, or they keep these records with the intent that they're documenting something, that they know they're a witness of something important, or they just want to people to remember it. Other times you get letters that are personal letters between individuals that were not supposed to be seen by other people. And I think, now you hear of court trials and stuff like that where they pull phone records and stuff like that. The people are aware that it kind of exists digitally, so it's harder to wrangle down and pin down. And that's not the sole purpose of archives, to uncover some of these unsavory stories or the more scintillating stories. But
I think the problem is the tech's not. They don't build the tech with the idea of how do I preserve this. It's just like, how do I get this message there now, which is what we need. So it's not. We need more archive-minded people to go into the tech world.
But it's really interesting if there's could be some partnership with these big tech companies to to talk with Facebook and Meta and say, hey, what kind of archives are you keeping? Or
I'm sure people are talking about it, but I haven't heard any nothing solid.
there's all this data privacy, and it's funny because sometimes it's like don't send an email, just handwrite that, or tell someone verbally, and before, that's how people knew stuff is it was written down and it survives. It's kind of gone in a different direction.
It's what's fascinating me. I've been working with a lot of the much older records, 1790s through 1820s, and people are people, so they first guilt each other in their letters, I haven't heard from you in so long. I wonder what I ever did to deserve this. They all do that to each other, but then you realize they don't.
Do you have my mom's letters in there?
But you realize, well, they haven't heard from them in 7 months. So yeah, mom's worried. So just the communication is different. So the letters were very long, and they were packed full of information. Sometimes it's just a laundry list of who died, who got married, who was born, who's sick, whose horse died, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just thinking about the way time and how information travels. I mean, people didn't know wars ended for months. So I don't know. Early white settlement of this area I've been really kind of focusing on those records that we have because they're fascinating to me. Just seeing how this area was settled and all the terrible stuff that happened too. But just making sure that I feel really good when I get more of that stuff up online. Because I'm like, yes, more researchers come, do research on this, because this is fascinating history.
Is there kind of a story or a certain document that stands out to you that was just kind of fascinating for you to see and to read?
Oh, well, a lot of them. One that really stands out to me is a document from 1853. It was written by Black Methodists here in Cincinnati, complaining to the larger Methodist group because they were supporting the American colonialization movement, which was to move newly freed people to Liberia.
Oh, yes.
And the freed people were like, no, my family's been here for hundreds of years. No, we're staying here. And it's a really long letter. It's 6 or 7 pages and beautiful writing, and just stating about how offended they were, that how dare you side with the slave power? How dare you side with that? We're all children of God. And it's a wonderful letter. It's just, when people ask my favorite document, I want to bring that up, but it's kind of a complicated one to explain. But it's to me, the language is so forceful and so indignant. It's moving. It gave me chills the first time I read it when that was first pointed out to me.
When you're looking at these, are you really reading every word, or sometimes are you skimming to see, and you kind of get to a point of, wait a minute, you back up.
Yep. Yeah, that happens often. Yeah.
You mentioned the handwriting. Do you see kind of in total handwriting decline through history, like as we get closer to the present, the handwriting kind of starts to fall off, or is it just a mixed bag?
I feel like handwriting really got bad in the last 30 years or so. I don't know. I mean, my parents had lovely handwriting, and I tried to write a card out, and it was bad. I couldn't, and it just didn't work. That's just not how we communicate anymore,
I swear there's a standardization in handwriting of certain generations because my mom and my wife's mom we'll get letters in the mail, we'll get cards in the mail, and they look the exact same. And it's like, well, how is that so? Why is that the standard mom script for some reason? Is there a person who stands out having really good and another person who stands out really bad handwriting that you've come across?
Oh, yeah.
Name drop them. Let's roast them.
John Quincy Adams is the best.
He does have really. I was
beautiful, beautiful.
See, is this exciting for you? For me, a layperson, to be like, there's a person in history whose handwriting stands out as being so pristine because I remember this.
Yes. And we have a collection full of his letters when he was trying to end the War of 1812 over in Europe. And I was like, we have so many letters. These are beautiful. And it's just packed full of gossip and information and all sorts of stuff. It's fascinating.
If I remember this correctly, because we had one of his letters on display in Treasures of Our Military Past,
Mm-hmm.
and it is... the writing is so bold, and it is just, it's that 1800s cursive, and it is incredible.
There's no mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I guess you have time. He's not scrolling social media, so he's working on his penmanship, I guess. Who has really bad handwriting?
John D. Jones, whom
Of course, yeah.
I know, yeah. He was a merchant. So we have his papers show up in a lot of things. His father-in-law was John Johnston, who was an Indian agent at Wapakoneta,
Hey, that's where
Fort
I'm from.
Wayne, at Piqua. So he was often supplying things to them. So his receipts and things appear everywhere, and his handwriting is just like... it's just like, I don't know what, it's like...
scratching it out?
It's just a scratch. You can't read it. It's just... And it's not just me, because some of the his letters that somebody 60 years ago tried to catalog, they said, indecipherable. They just put that
All right, I have two follow-up questions. One is, does the handwriting kind of follow wealth or education or something? Like, do you find these letters from people who are on the frontier kind of really scratched out either because of materials they had available or like the setting or the education? Like, am I just trying to make up some connection there, or have you found something that...
No, I think you're on to something. They're definitely, people, having good penmanship was like something you were proud of. You didn't want to be that guy that people you've seen his writing. You don't want to be that guy. Nobody would want to marry you if you can't write well. So there was a prestige issue with it. But definitely on the frontier, that it was like scraps of paper and the spelling gets creative.
Penmanship is the original catfishing. Someone is writing a letter to a woman and like, look how beautiful his handwriting is, and he shows up like, oh my gosh.
Well, usually you can tell because
you do not look like your handwriting.
We'll often have somebody else write the letter and then they'll sign it. And if you see the signature's really bad, you're like, oh, I see why you didn't write that letter.
How do you read it? How do you decipher some of this stuff? Is it just context clues?
Yes. It's being a bit of a detective. So you look at the page, you look, okay, how else has this person made the letter D or the letter A or the letter E? So you're trying to like figure that out. Sometimes you just don't have any context. Sometimes it's just a scrap of paper receipt. And
just good luck, right?
Yeah, good luck. But it's something that you get better with the more you read it.
Sometimes it's like personal hieroglyphics. Like this is what a B looks like for this person, and you kind of have to train yourself on individual alphabets. I've worked with journalists, and they're usually print journalists. They'll have the old school notebook, and they're not letters that they write down. I have no idea how they go back and they know what they put down, but it's because I've looked and one time I said, can I look at that? How do you read that? And they go, oh, I just know. It's more so I just need kind of like to figure out one word and that'll bring back that portion of the story. I'm like, okay, good for you. So you're kind of like you're like a detective. You remember in the newspaper used to, crossword puzzles and the jumble and stuff like that. But then there was always, you had to decipher a famous quote where, letters correlated with different. The letters were all mixed up. So an H may be a G, and you had to figure this stuff out. Is that you open a box and say, great, another puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, I love puzzles. So
Okay.
I've always been a puzzle person. So usually, what do I do to relax? I do a puzzle. So yeah, that's all I do is puzzles. So I enjoy it.
Have you found any document, you looked at it and you said, oh, that's a little saucy?
Saucy? No.
No? Okay. So one of the favorite things I've ever learned is that Warren G. Harding used to write letters to his mistress. And this is, again, where you think, these are not supposed to be seen by anyone. But someone is like, oh, hey, I found these letters in my grandmother's trunk, and they appear to be from President Harding. Would you like them? And say, oh, sure, this is important. We're the Warren G. Harding Presidential Library or Historic Site or something. And they get them, and oh, this is great. And, talking about Teapot Dome and all this other stuff. Whoa.
I mean, there very well could be. I've never come across anything. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe people are a little holding it close to their chest. I don't know.
Has there been a document that's kind of blown you away, or a signature, or you look at something and you're kind of reading through and then you see who signed it or who wrote it and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it happens often. I'm blasé now. I'm just like, yeah, Daniel Webster, whatever. But
that old guy.
That guy. But the ones that really got me recently was seeing on the receipts for the annuities that they paid to different tribes and nations. And seeing the mark of Blackhoof and seeing the mark of Little Turtle and seeing those sorts of things, it just, I don't know, it just made it just like, oh, they touched this piece of paper I touched here. That's, I don't know, it just brings like a special connection to it.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Did they write in English or was it truly a symbol? It
was a symbol, usually like, they would call it their mark, and then they would write in parentheses under it what their name was in English. So sometimes people had lots of different names. They would often have their name in their language, but then they would be like, or it'd be something. There's one I just saw recently, Civil John. I can't remember I couldn't pronounce his real name, but he's known as Civil John. So it's pretty fascinating.
With the materials that you're working with, that's as close as anyone's going to get to speaking to these people or to hearing them talk, as seeing these documents. Right.
That's why I'm going through them, and they were cataloged before, but not to the detail that really brings out. Okay, this is something he's talking to the Shawnee. This one's he's talking to the Senecas. So bringing out all those names, so when someone goes to our website, they can do a keyword search, and then that pops up. That's the goal, is to get more people researching this stuff.
How do you preserve this? I mean, paper's pretty fickle. If anyone's had a homework sheet on the table and a water cup gets knocked over on it, it could be pretty fragile. How do you preserve paper?
Well, you put it in acid-free folders and boxes and lock it up somewhere where there's no sun and the temperature stays about the same. Really, that's all an archives is we put things in the nicest things so the paper hopefully doesn't deteriorate further, and then keep it out of any direct light, any more light than we have to. For paper items, they just can't be out on display very long. It'll fade far too fast, especially if they're older. Some of the older ink has iron gall ink, and then that sort of rusts through and it just deteriorates really fast. You just have to be very careful.
Thinking of like the Declaration, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, I mean, that stuff's out every single day. And if you visited recently, it's almost indecipherable. And it's very, very faint and very hard to see that. I mean, do you think there's a point where, like, what's the value, and like this is doing much more harm than good, or are they tricking us and the real one is locked away somewhere? We've all seen National Treasure.
I couldn't get through that movie.
No, you couldn't?
No, I hate
Is it a
that
Nicolas
movie.
Cage thing, or is it an inaccuracy thing?
Both.
Inaccuracy.
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Do you like any Nicolas Cage movie?
I think there was one. It was okay. I don't remember.
All right.
It drives my husband crazy. Yeah. But no, that is a good question. At what point do you have to have it out? I'm really protective of our stuff, so I don't know. I'll leave it to the experts at the Smithsonian National Archives, Library of Congress to deal with that. But I wouldn't want our stuff out. Anything that we have out in the museums is a copy. And just like the copies that Dave Mike makes of animals and plants, he does amazing copies of paper that people will swear that's not. I'm like, no, the original's over in the box over here.
Well, which that begs the question: if you can recreate, which is more important, the content or the original format of it? Or are they? The simple answer: they're both important.
They are both important. I veer a little more toward the information's more important. But also, if you can use a scan and then protect an item from everyday use, it's fine. Also, though, but I get people want to see things in person. So, I go to other museums and I'm like annoyed that I can't touch stuff. I can't go in the back and touch stuff. And
you're the worst museum visitor.
I'm
you want
the
to touch
worst because I'm
everything.
like, oh my God, look how they mounted that. Look at what's holding that up. It's angled like that, and they put the little magnifying glass in. So yeah, my poor long-suffering husband. Yeah.
Is it hard for him to visit museums with you?
He says he loves it. He's the type that will read every label, so he's busy doing that, and I'm over there looking at the mounts and the.
One of the first things I got to do when I moved into the marketing department here, I don't remember what the document was now, but I did get to work with Scott Gamfer, who was our former curator of history objects in our library. And they were talking about handling documents. And I was blown away because you think it's so, everyone touches paper every single day. So you think you have a pretty good idea of how to handle it. I mean, not everyone touches a dinosaur bone every day. So they may like, oh, well, there's special considerations. But there are very specific ways you need to handle paper. Everyone thinks of museums, they think of the white cotton gloves, and that is the worst way to touch a document, right?
Right. Yes, best way is clean, dry hands. No lotion, no nail polish. Clean, dry hands are better because gloves. I have small hands, so cotton gloves always have like an extra inch on the end of them, so that makes you clumsy and things can snag on them.
What happens if you are handling a document and it does rip?
I knew you were going to ask
tear.
that.
Do we need Mitch to strike this from the record?
No. I think everybody who deals with manuscript records at some point accidentally rips a little when you're removing a staple or something like that. I've never had any big giant rip or anything like that. But if it is bad and it's something that needs work, we used to have a preservation department that would fix it for us, or we would just reach out to one of our partners who does conservation work. But that's part of why we have those procedures for proper handling, and that's one of the first things we teach, go over with researchers coming in, patrons coming in, and as well as like any interns or students working with us is slow down. This isn't a rush. Slow down. Pick it up carefully. Have a plan where you're going. Don't just pick up a document with no plan of where you're going to put it down. So it's just being thoughtful and always supporting everything.
So speaking of knowing those kinds of things, how does one become an archivist? What was your path to Cincinnati Museum Center?
I got a degree in history at the University of Florida. And then
You're from Florida. I remember. Okay, you're from
Wiki Watchy.
Wiki Watchy with the mermaids.
Yes.
In Florida.
Yes. Yes. All my poor classmates hunkering down for the hurricane right now. But yeah, so I got a degree in history, and then I was trying to figure out what to do. Took a year off to just think and work. And I ended up going to Wright State University for their public history program. My older sister went through that program, and I remember walking through the archives and being like, this is so cool. Because one of the archivists showed me some of the Wright brothers stuff, and I was like, ooh, okay. Because I didn't really think I wanted to teach history, but I still liked that part of it. So then I went through the public history program there, which combined museum and archive work. I think they're different tracks now. And then I took an internship my final year at Wright State with the American Jewish Archives. And then that turned into a permanent job. And then I came here.
When did you join the Museum Center?
2007.
Okay. So coming up on 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I know.
Oh my gosh. When you studied history, did you have a particular time period, area that you focused on, or were you just along for the ride, or kind of the process of it? Because people don't think that history is maybe similar to science. It is a process. If you understand how to study history and approach history, you can kind of apply it to any time period. I studied history, but it's because I was interested in very specific pockets of it. Mm-hmm. So what drew you to it?
I've always been interested in the early settlement of North America. So that's the kind of era I've always been interested in. So any sort of... I kind of start to lose interest by the 1880s. That's a little too recent once you get to the 1880s.
We just had this when I was in grad school, different students would say, "Oh, what are you studying?" "Oh, I'm studying the 1940s." "Oh, so you're doing current events? You're not doing history?" And it was this funny little contention. So, but your current events start in the 1880s.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I guess I was late born to my parents in a big family, so my parents were a bit older. So I was like, if you're interested in the 1940s, that's when my parents were teenagers. So that's weird. Why don't you just talk to them?
Do you have a favorite document in the collections, or does it kind of vary?
It varies. It's like every day I have a new favorite. It just depends on what I'm working on at the time. And that's the fun, is like people send me emails with questions, and I'm looking up subjects that I would not have looked up otherwise. I would not have looked up stuff about the frog valve and railroad making here in Cincinnati. I wouldn't, no. But then you find something about that's interesting. So I don't know.
One time you showed me, it was, when did the Roebling Bridge open? Because we had like the 150th anniversary or something of that, and you were pulling out documents for that.
Yeah.
And there was one where and I may be misremembering this, or I may have fabricated this in my mind, but I swear it was like a sketch. Someone was like, you can't build the bridge over the river because how are the boats going to get through? Like it.
Yeah.
And John Roebling was like, here, and kind of like sketched it out in some book. Does this exist?
I think it might be in a printed book. I don't
okay.
know. I'm not.
I do, but it's amazing because we had someone from the newspaper in, and they were talking, asking questions, and you're like, here's the receipt for lumber, and all this stuff, and like just interesting things when you think about because you drive over the Roebling Bridge, you look at it, and you don't think of these things that someone's ordering the supplies, and someone's responsible for all this record keeping, right. And it exists. It's like we still have access to those.
Yeah.
Is there a document that is like, at some point Rick Springfield had to get tired of singing Jesse's Girl, but everyone at the concert's like, do Jesse's Girl. Like, is there a document that it's like, oh, Christine, will you bring this up? We have donors coming through. We have someone coming through. Will you bring this document out? Is there one that you're like, this one again? And why is it the Lincoln Letters?
Why is it the Lincoln Letters? I love the Lincoln Letters, but I'm like, there's other stuff. No, I think, you know what? There used to be that. It was like the show you bring out, and I think it was from having the same curators for a long time, and they just would bring out the same stuff. But right now, having added 2 new curators to the history team in the past few years, it's infused a new energy, and I feel like we're all digging into our collections a little more thoughtfully of how they connect and everything. So, I don't know. I think I'm hoping that I've found that when we do tours of Geyer, and you often notice all of the curators often come around together because we all love seeing each other's collections. And I've been noticing we've all been not bringing out the same stuff over and over. So I'm hoping that it's like a contagious thing that everyone's like, I'm going to dig a little deeper, not just grab the same thing every time.
It's interesting you said that you all love seeing what's in each other's collections, because you think, you have the view of people who are outside of Geyer, which is our collections facility, and you think, oh, they're all over there together, and they're kind of like, oh, look what I have. But you're all doing your own work, so a lot of times you are kind of in your own little pockets or silos. So is there something from someone else's collection that you're like, that you just love to see, that you're so fascinated by?
I like
Pick your favorite curator. That's what we're asking.
No, there's so many different things, but I do love the little itty bitty fossils. I know, like Cameron and Brenda had out the other day. They're just weird. They look. I'm like, I don't know. I always say there's nothing more horrific than nature. So I love horror movies, but there's nothing more horrific than like if you blow up like a scorpion or something. You're like, oh my God, that's scary looking.
Well, Glenn told us yesterday that the Earth is constantly recycling itself, which to me feels terrifying. Like, it feels like we're like, don't piss off Mother Nature, because she'll recycle you real fast.
I mean, in a geologic timescale, yes, very fast.
That's a weird thought. Thanks.
One of my favorite memories of you is a handful of years ago, and it's funny because my wife just brought this up the other day. A handful of years ago, we did Ask a Curator Day, and one of the questions was, what kind of music do you like? And do you remember your response? Do you remember?
Is it Black Sabbath?
Yes, yes. And my wife's sister, she'll still bring it up every now and then. She'll be like, "You guys have a metal curator, and that's awesome." Because it's so, people think of curators as, the stereotypical like librarians in movies and stuff, like very, very stuffy, very buttoned up. And so people are like, oh, what kind of music do you listen to? Do you, classical and all this stuff, or like slow jazz? And you're like, no. Which is funny because you say Black Sabbath, but as you have students and interns in, go slow down, but we are going to be listening to Crazy Train while we're doing it.
I don't inflict my music on anybody else. It wouldn't be kind.
No?
No. We all do our own little separate silos. But really, I'd say now I'm more into King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is my new favorite band. It's an Australian band. Look it up.
Okay.
They're very eclectic. Like one album will be metal, and the next one will be acid jazz.
So you know this?
I'm aware of them, but I haven't really listened to much myself yet.
It's very fun.
Mitch is such a journeyman.
I know a little bit about a lot of things.
Mitch would be a great curator. You would be you're a good researcher. Mitch is a really good researcher.
I like to think I'm a good researcher. I do end up doing a lot more research than I think on some videos, where some information is less forthcoming, and then you're looking up one thing and suddenly you're down a rabbit hole and realize that you found something else about the other thing that you didn't think you need to look up.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like a typical day. Yes.
It's interesting you talked about that, Mitch, because you'll be working on a video and someone will mention something, so you need to go pull like a photo to go along with it or something. And as you're doing that, you realize that someone misspoke, that they'll get a date wrong or they'll get the person's name wrong. Then you kind of sit there and you go, all right, how do I cut around this? Or how do I go back and say, hey, remember when you were wearing that orange shirt when we did this? I need you to grab that again. We're going to re-record it. So it is, it's just because there, everyone has so much stuff rattling around in their head. It's very easy to misspeak. So,
Yeah.
where would people see your work on the museum floor?
On the museum floor, well, it would be in any of the local smaller exhibits that we do. It would be with any of the documents that are chosen. You mentioned that military document, the John Quincy Adams letter. I'm like, I chose that. That was my choice. So, yeah.
How much leeway do you get? And how much do you get to kind of influence?
A lot.
Yeah.
That was the first exhibit I really got to, and Scott was just like, I don't have time. Go for it. So I did, and he's like, yep, it's in. I'm like, really? Really? Okay, cool. So, somebody else will look at it and then like, should this really be there? And but I think we all take that responsibility really seriously. So anytime anything is like put forward to could be on an exhibit, we've like researched it a lot, usually.
So when you're working with researchers, where are they coming in from? What are they? What level are they? Major historians who've written 100 books and they're continuing as a student working on a paper, or what's the kind of gamut that you're working with there?
It's kind of all over the place. We definitely have a lot of historians that contact us, and people working on their dissertations. A lot of UC local college students use it, but then I think a huge amount of our users are local genealogists. Some of our biggest users and biggest supporters, actually. But we also get kids in from like doing like high school paper, when they work on local history topics, they come in. Jill and Mickey mostly deal with that stuff. But yeah, it runs the gamut of all sorts of things. And then every once in a while you just get somebody who's like, hey, I'm curious, and I heard I can come down there and look at these records for free. And you're like, yeah, anytime, just let us know. And they're like, what? What's the catch? I'm like, there's no catch. Well, you have to pay for parking. But there's no other catch than that. It's free.
And so when someone comes in, what's the setup like? I mean, are you, do you just set the documents on the table and have a yardstick and smack their hands if they touch it, or they?
No. Well, when you come in, we do have paperwork to fill out. Where we make sure that you're a real human being. You have to show ID. And that's just for the case of security, in case anything goes missing, that we can track everything. So as soon as we bring a box or a folder to your table, you have to sign off that you've received it, and then we sign off that we've given it to you. So there's like this double checking. Every time a document moves, it's documented that it moved.
This is like renting a U-Haul truck.
Yeah, there's a lot of logistics in archives. There really is. Don't even get into moving collections.
We won't put you through that again. I think the most I've ever seen you was when we were moving pieces out of the library here at Union Terminal, and then during the restoration, and then kind of moving pieces back in. It was like a video game where you were filling pallets and then you were emptying pallets, and then was that the same pallet? Is the same stuff, or is that new stuff? And
right. I mean, people. I have to stop myself when people talk about moving things, and I was like, oh, it was awful. But it wasn't that awful. I mean, it was awful, but I think the most thing that was awful is it's not like moving your house. You're going to be moving for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And so that kind of wears you down after a while of just standing there checking. Even if you have movers, you're not physically moving it yourself. You have to make sure that everything stays in exact order so that everything is tracked, and you check off that everything goes from one place to another. So it's very, very much logistics.
I'm trying to visualize in my head, and I'm realizing I think your collections are just a bunch of file cabinets, like that it's in any office, and these are all manila folders. How do you store all these?
They're on shelves, on metal shelves. Different records have to be stored a different way. We have some like architectural records are enormous, so they are on giant, big flat files. But generally speaking, things are put in boxes and then put on a shelf. We have some things in file cabinets, but mostly no.
I'm just imagining, all these movies where someone breaks in and they're trying to find something, so they're rifling through the.
See, again, my
the
poor
file
husband,
cabinets.
when we're watching something, I'm like, oh, they're in the archives. Oh, look, there's Hollinger boxes. And he's like, shut up.
What's a Hollinger box?
Oh, that's the gray boxes that you see. They're
Okay, yeah,
acid-free
yeah.
box. They're called Hollinger boxes because that was the name of the company, kind of like how tissues are called Kleenexes.
Is there just one Hollinger box company, or are there knockoff brands as well?
There's several companies. And there's boxes of all different sizes, and you can request your own custom boxes too. So
When I ship something, it's always in the wrong. I'm like, this is big enough, and I'm having to break the box down and then kind of tape it back together. Do you have it down where you're just
No.
you know the size you need? No.
no, I mean mostly yes, but I mean every once in a while there's like the one item that doesn't fit in any box you have. You're like, ugh. So then you have to order a custom box or make it yourself. Sarah's kind of good at making stuff.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not good at crafty things, but she's good at making stuff.
There are two questions I ask everyone, and I wonder if you might have tipped your hand on one. If you had a walk-up song, like baseball players always have walk-up music. If you had a walk-up song, what would it be?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't know?
Is this something I'm supposed to think about?
Yeah, because you never know when
Really?
you never know when you're going
I
to need
wouldn't
it.
know. I'll be honest.
Listen, you're gonna be asked to be on a panel for a conference, and they're gonna say, "Great, can you send us your bio and your walk-up song so that when we introduce you, we know what to play."
Oh, no. Wow, that is a weird question.
It took us all the way to this point to ask one, so we're good. Doing pretty well overall.
I don't know. I have no clue.
All right, you get a pass on that. But this one you do have to answer. If you had to trade roles with anyone in the museum for a day, who would you trade roles with?
I knew you would ask this, so this was hard for me because I was like, my job's the best. I don't want anyone else's job. But I think Rodney. I want his keys. I just want to be able to walk anywhere in the building and not get locked and have to call security. I think that would be really cool. I don't necessarily want the responsibility of his job, like making decisions on, really important building things. I don't know that I'd want that, but
You just want the keys.
I want the key. But it would also just be like, let me look. What all does he have? That's a lot of buildings. That's a lot.
It's true.
Yeah.
Every now and then I've asked public safety for keys, and they're like, I'm not sure which one that door is. Here, we'll just hand you a master. And I've been so restrained in having that power that I've never been like, what else? What other doors will this open besides this specific one that I need? But Rodney is a surprisingly common answer. Rodney comes up kind of often for the same reason you're mentioning. Jill comes up, our CFO comes up every now and then because people want to control the dollars.
Oh.
They want to control the money and the budget. Yeah, that's kind of nice. Dave Mike comes up a lot too because people always think what Dave does
I could do his job.
is really cool. And see, that's the other aspect of it is you're thinking about what job you would want for a day. Is there someone you're like, I would like to see how they do my job for a day? You were like, where you kind of punk them, you're like, oh no, read this document. Read this incomprehensible document. And I'll grade you on it.
I don't know. I think, you know what? It sounds cheesy, but I would have Whitney because she's always so excited about anything they show her from whatever collection. I love her enthusiasm is really infectious. I would
Just let her get in there and play around.
I think I would love to see like her frustration if they're the same frustrations that Sarah and I have been doing the work. How quick she is to picking up where the problem spots are, and also it would just be fun to see like, okay, with these letters, what stands out on these letters? Like these are ones we pulled out as important. What stands out to you about them? What makes them important? And how would you arrange that?
That's interesting. I am foolishly realizing now that people are going to read, multiple people will read the same letter and take away different parts of it. The different things are going to stand out for them in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's wild. All right, well, we could continue this forever, but the documents aren't going to take care of themselves. So, Christine, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. Thank you all for listening to Meanwhile at the Museum. Remember, if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe. But more importantly, come see for yourself. Visit cincymuseum.org to see the latest reasons to visit. And if you have any questions, comments, or just want to tell us how much you love the show, send us an email at meanwhile@cincymuseum.org. Thank you all for listening.